There were some flashes of competitiveness, but all in all, as team staff packed up the technical equipment to return to Europe, Ferrari's Canadian trip unfortunately ended with a result that fell short of expectations. Expectations that, from the outset, were not particularly high, to be honest. Thanks to Lando Norris's self-sabotage, both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton gained a position in the final standings at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, but they still remained far from the podium. The bottom step of the podium could have been a realistic goal had it not been for Charles Leclerc's misfortunes, namely 2 errors on Friday and Saturday that had a major impact on his weekend. Starting from the 4th row on the grid led Ferrari's strategists to opt for hard tires, a choice that was also shared by Lando Norris, who started from 7th, a strategy that, overall, worked. However, Charles Leclerc disagreed with the pit wall when he was called in on lap 28 to switch from his first to a second set of hards. In his view, he should have continued aiming for a one-stop race. That would have meant reaching at least lap 50 before switching to mediums and hoping they could last for the final 20 laps. This would have been the riskiest part of the strategy. In the end, it would not have changed much anyway. After his second stop, the Monegasque driver rejoined on new medium tires on lap 54, trailing Lando Norris by 11 seconds and race leader George Russell by 18. 12 laps later, just before the safety car came out, Charles Leclerc had lost ground both to George Russell, 23 seconds behind, and to Lando Norris, 17 seconds behind. The problem was a lack of pace and performance, and no strategy can stretch a short operating window. After the race, even Charles Leclerc admitted it. The Ferrari driver acknowledged that a different strategy might have been worth trying, but believed it would not have significantly altered the race outcome. He stated that 5th place was the best result they could achieve, and that their starting position had been the main limiting factor. Vasseur admitted that too many mistakes had been made over the weekend, starting with Charles Leclerc's crash in the first free practice session and continuing throughout the event. The Ferrari team principal explained that he had spoken with Charles Leclerc after the race and agreed that when starting from the back, taking some risks was justified. However, the French manager felt that attempting a 50-lap stint on the initial set of hard tires had been overly optimistic. Vasseur also pointed out that they had likely lacked sufficient data over the weekend to properly assess tire degradation. The references the Ferrari team principal was referring to were the laps Charles Leclerc missed in FP2, a session he sat out due to the crash in the earlier free practice session. On the other side of the garage, the issues are different. In Lewis Hamilton's case, he paid the price for hitting a groundhog, which seriously damaged the right side of the floor. The Maranello team estimated the loss at 20 points of downforce, making the Britain's race at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve rather hard to assess. Beyond that, it was clear that Lewis Hamilton is loudly asking for a competitive car for next season and a shift in the current one, namely aerodynamic updates to a car that has not changed much in some time. There are 2 problems for Lewis Hamilton. The first is that, with the current aerodynamic technical package, it is practically impossible for Ferrari to aim for the top step of the podium and on several tracks, including Montreal, even for the other 2. The second headache for Lewis Hamilton is that, without new technical variables, the chances of matching Charles Leclerc's level are becoming increasingly slim. Whether in the qualifying session or in terms of race pace, groundhog damage aside, Charles Leclerc is able to get more out of the car, and for Lewis Hamilton, considering his ambition and public image, this is becoming a problem. Ferrari, all in all, ended a disappointing weekend in Canada, clearly lacking the pace to contend with the leading pack. On the other hand, the Canadian Grand Prix brought an unexpected victory for George Russell and Mercedes, a team previously labeled as a tire eater. The Brackley squad proved to be the best at handling the challenges of an unusual weekend in which McLaren missed out on the podium altogether. The first question raised at the checkered flag was what suddenly neutralized the dominant McLarens and instead lit up the silver arrows. As always, there is no single answer, but tires played a major role. In Spain, as on many other tracks, the race was shaped by thermal degradation, a domain where McLaren usually leads. The phenomenon is caused by tire deformation under heavy lateral loads, especially on rough asphalt, which generates heat within the tire structure. In Canada, however, the situation was entirely different. On a circuit with few long corners, smooth tarmac, and cars running mid to low downforce setups, tire deformation was far less intense. Long straights also helped cool the tires, despite track temperatures reaching 50 degrees Celsius on Sunday. As a result, thermal degradation became less of a factor, reducing McLaren's typical tire management advantage, including over a single lap, while also mitigating Mercedes's usual weaknesses. Instead, mechanical degradation, which is commonly known as graining, took center stage. This phenomenon involves rubber tearing off the tire surface due to sliding. Mercedes excelled in this area through setup work, finding a balance that protected the rear tires from wear without inducing front-end understeer that would worsen graining. Both drivers managed to survive the tricky early phases of the race, during which many reported unexpectedly high wear compared to Friday's simulations, which were conducted on a track about 10 degrees cooler. As the rubber built up on the surface throughout the race, graining became progressively less critical. Freed from its tire overheating demons, the W16 in Montreal was able to leverage its strengths, including traction and rear stability under braking, crucial on a stop-and-go circuit. The win and double podium capped a flawless weekend execution from Mercedes, highlighting not only their recent development push, but also the reintroduction of the new rear suspension, which is just the tip of the iceberg. Ironically, Red Bull came away with a stroke of luck in Canada. Max Verstappen reduced his championship deficit on a weekend where he expected to lose more ground. The reigning world champion made the difference in his outlaps on cold tires after pit stops, while Mercedes expected to benefit from delaying Kimi Antonelli's stops. Now, Red Bull looks to Austria, one of Max Verstappen's strongest tracks, where they aim to bounce back. Returning to Ferrari, it was a bitter weekend for the Maranello team in the Canadian Grand Prix, as they relinquished second place in the Constructors' Championship to Mercedes. With this latest result, Ferrari is now the only top team yet to win a race in the 2025 Formula One season. Much of this drought is rooted in Saturday performances, an area Mercedes often executes well. The Maranello engineers and technicians must now make the most of its one-lap gains on new tires, which were wasted in Canada due to imperfect execution by the drivers. The strategy with Charles Leclerc raised some questions to fans, as the team committed to a two-stop approach that left him hopelessly behind the leading pack. In hindsight, a one-stop strategy paid off for Esteban Ocon and Carlos Sainz, who climbed back into the points by taking advantage of the track's evolution to extend tire life. But race simulations show that not much would have changed for the Ferrari SF-25 cars, regardless of the strategy used in Montreal. At the same time, one could also ask why McLaren didn't gamble on a single stop with Lando Norris. More importantly, comparing Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc reveals that Ferrari's biggest issue wasn't strategy, but rather race pace. In the middle stint, Charles Leclerc lost time to Lando Norris even while running harder tires, and he fell further back in the final stint of the Canadian Grand Prix, despite having mediums that were 6 laps fresher than Lando Norris's hards. This was a Ferrari lacking rhythm in Montreal, now clinging to long-awaited aerodynamic updates in order to avoid the risk of finishing the 2025 Formula One Championship without even a single race victory.